Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 63 of Saved You a Seat. Today, we are going to go over our standard tips and tricks. And I just want to remind everyone that we do break up our tips and tricks by version. We have a select track that we've done some and will continue to do, but today we are focusing on the standard version. And some tips and tricks within the standard version of our software. So if you are a select user, this might not be as helpful. There's going to be some differences, as you know, between the versions, but I just wanted to go ahead and point that out real quick. Per usual, we do record these, and you'll get a copy of a link to the recording over the next week after the webinar. So if you want to share that, or if you want to, use it as training or a refresher, please feel free to do so. We also encourage questions, so you can use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar on your screen, and we will try and monitor and get through as many questions as we can. If we by chance don't get to your question, we might reach out on the side and try and help you out. If it's not something we can answer, we'll put you in touch with somebody that can. But with that, I think you guys don't want to hear me talking, so I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Ames, a trainer at SoftPro, to take you through and show you all the cool tips and tricks. So thanks, Jessica.
Thank you. So welcome everyone to today's Saved You a Seat. Like Leslie said, my name is Jessica. I've been a trainer here at SoftPro for almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years this summer. And I love doing this. So I love to do either online trainings, or I have the benefit of getting to visit customer offices in person and train them on how our software works. And so like Leslie said, we're going to focus on the standard enterprise edition. So what I'm going to demonstrate for you will be in my version of enterprise, but everything that is on my agenda for us to cover today will apply in, I think, almost all circumstances to both enterprise and standard. So please feel free to send your questions, comments, anything that you guys want to discuss while we're here with this next hour, and we will address it. So for any of you that have attended any of our Saved You a Seats, especially the tips and tricks in the past, we typically start out with keyboard shortcuts. I'm someone who loves a keyboard shortcut. I'm more of a keyboard person versus a mouse person. So I'm going to kind of change it up today, and we're going to kind of filter those in. We're going to push them in there every here and there. I do want to just start out with one keyboard shortcut that I hope everybody knows. And if you don't, I'm happy to let you know that anytime that you have ProForm open, or even if you're in ProTrust, you can hit your F1 function key, and that is going to launch our help website. This is a fantastic resource if you have questions about how to do something within ProForm, within ProTrust. Us as the training team, we post information out here. It could either be a video, it could be a job aid, a document that you could download, print out, save it to your computer. So this is a great, fantastic resource. I like to think of it as our online handbook. I often get questions of, is there a manual for using SoftPro? Well, we have one. It's just online. So we don't have a paper version, but we have one that's online. So anytime that you are in either ProForm or ProTrust, you can simply hit your F1 function key, and that will launch the help website. You can also, in both ProForm and ProTrust, go to the help menu and then choose the option of help topics. It'll do the same thing as your F1 function key, and it will take you to our help website. So lots of really good resources out here for you. All right, so my plan today for our tips and tricks is kind of focus on the money part, the escrow part, the closing part, whatever we want to call it. What can help us balance? What can help us edit and change disbursements? what can help us build our CD better. So one thing I want to start with is if I go to my CDF tab, I want to go to this additional title charges screen. This is a really great screen that gives us some conveniences that we don't get in entering those title charges directly on our CD, say page 2, for example. So if I kind of back up for a second, let's go to the premium screen. So the policy premium screen is available to us in both the title insurance tab as well as the CDF tab. This is where I can use my lookup table. So that very first field at the top of our screen is our underwriter policy lookup code field. We can hit our F9 function key. That's our keyboard shortcut for accessing our lookup tables. And in there, we can have stored our different policy types for the state or states. If we do multiple closings in multiple states, we can have those policy rates stored. We can also have them stored in for multiple underwriters. And we can choose that policy type from the lookup table just by double clicking, and it will calculate our premiums. Those premiums then flow to our CD. The next screen we have available is endorsements. Any endorsements that we may or may not need to charge for. We can enter those endorsements on this screen. Those charges, those descriptions can then flow to our CD or HUD or settlement statement, depending on the transaction type. The benefit of this screen is that we can enter in those descriptions and those dollar amounts. And if I click on this More button, I have the option of setting up an agent underwriter split. So when we are splitting the cost of that premium or endorsement premium between us and our underwriter, that's something I can do within the file without having to wait until I'm ready to disperse and then worry about splitting up those checks or those disbursements later. For any of those additional fees, anything above those premiums and endorsement fees, we have the screen called additional title charges. So whether it be something like my closing protection letter, or maybe it's just my own closing fee, my own wire fee, right? Thinking about my office, what do we collect as settlement agent? We can add those fees to the screen. And what benefit do I get by putting those fees here versus just going straight directly onto CD page 2 and entering those fees right on either the, let's say, section B, section C. So number one, you can see that I've entered in my descriptions. So I have a settlement fee, doc prep, CPL, courier, wire. I've put in those dollar amounts. These are fees that I have entered into my template. They are fees that I typically charge on most, if not all, purchase type transactions. So already those fees are populated for me. I don't have to manually type them on every individual file. If I then go to the More button, if any of these fees are need to be split between me and my underwriter, I can set up that split. So with my settlement fee, you can see I've said that this is going to get paid to me as a settlement agent 100%. If I go to, let's say, my closing protection letter fee, click on that More button, I have that set to be paid 100% to the underwriter. So that's one benefit that we get. We can split up if there are any other additional title fees that we need to divvy up between us and the underwriter, we can set those up in this screen. In this More screen, I can also see exactly what section, what line number this fee is going to populate to on my CD. So next to that line drop down, I have what we call an ellipses button. So it's a little square button with 3 little dots on it. When you click on it, it will take you to that line item. It will show you exactly how that's going to be described on your CD. I also get a preview of the description next to that ellipses button. And you can see that the word title and the dash prior to the description I typed has been automatically populated. I don't have to remember to do that. I don't have to manually type it. It's something the system will do for me. So one of the requirements, one of the rules we need to follow, the CFPB, the TRID rules, that anything associated with title needs to have that label of title and dash prior to the description. The system will do that for you if you are putting your fees into this additional title charges screen and then basically pushing them or feeding them to your CD. So if I close each of these screens and look at CD page 2, currently all of my title fees are in section C. They all have that label in front of them, title dash, whatever the description is. They're all showing as payable to me as the settlement agent. You'll notice that they are in black text. So when we are working through our Proform file, what is the difference between the red and the black text? Anytime you see something that's in red text, that is an indicator to you that it is text that was entered by a person. So somebody, for example, in section B here, typed appraisal fee. They chose the DS code. They entered the payee. They entered in the dollar amount. That's why that is showing in red text. When I look at section C, those title fees are showing in black text. And that means that the system is pulling them from somewhere else. The system is generating those descriptions and payees and dollar amounts from somewhere else in the file. So that's our difference between red and black text. The benefit of the black text is that I can change where those fees go. What if I work with a lender who can never make up their mind of, do they want our title fees in section C or do they want our title fees in section B when I'm working through that approval process with my lender? Although we, in most cases, probably don't use our version of the buyer CD specifically at the closing table, we typically use the lender's version of it. What if during that approval process, the lender's being very picky and they want the title fees to show in section B and not section C? If I had typed manually those title fees in section C and they were showing as red text, and my lender is requiring me to move them to section B, I would have to delete everything and then retype it. However, the fact that I'm sending these fees to the CD, they are showing in black text. Why do they show up here? Because that's where I told them to go. So there is an option. If I close my CD page 2 screen and I move down to my CDF options screen, I can simply, with one click of my mouse, open up this screen and change this drop down right here. Where do I want all of my title fees to populate to? Do I want them to be in section B, section C, or section H? If I move to section B, reopen CD page 2, every single one of those title fees has moved seamlessly up to section B. I didn't have to delete or retype anything. So that's another one of those added conveniences we get in using those title screens to our advantage. We get this added flexibility of being able to move fees to different sections. I can quickly go back. Lender changed their mind again. They don't want them in section B. They want them back in section C. Easy peasy for me. I can come to my options screen, change that option for all other title fees, and I look at CD page 2, and all those fees have moved back to section C. Now, one thing with sending your fees from a different screen to your CD is that they will, by default, be charged to the buyer. So when I look at section C, the fees I have listed are all in the borrower buyer paid at closing column. What if some of these fees need to get paid by the seller? When I click on the line number hyperlink, so on the left-hand side of your CD, you always will see in every section that each line has a number, and that number is underlined, which means it's a hyperlink. So when you click on that line number, it will take you behind the line. We as trainers call it behind the line because we're kind of going behind the scenes. We're seeing more information about that one particular line item. Behind the line, you see, of course, more details, and then you also will find that there's a seller percent pay field. This will allow me to dictate whether this fee is going to get charged to the buyer or charged to the seller. So if, for example, this courier fee is on the responsibility of the seller, I'm going to put in the number 100% in that seller percent field. It moves that fee over to the seller paid at closing column, and none of that $30 in our example is going to get charged to our buyer.
Hey, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, how did you get to that main folder?
Main folder, like behind the line?
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Okay. So when you're on CD page 2 or CD page 3, either one, in any section, if you look to the left-hand side, you've got a number. And that number is underlined. Just click on that line number, and then it takes you behind the line where you see the more information, the more details about that line item. And back there is where you're going to find your seller percent field. So let's do a different example. Let's say our settlement fee. Currently, I'm charging $500. It's all being put on the buyer. But in our tradition, our scenario, right, what's customary in our area, that fee gets split between buyer and seller. If I click on that line number hyperlink, so over to the left-hand side, find the line number, click on that, that's where we'll find our seller percent field. If I put seller 50, that means 50%. When I close this dialog box, I can now see that my 500 is split 50-50 between my buyer and my seller. So any of our traditional fees, those can always get added to a template. So if we kind of back up here, let's pretend I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to close this file. I'm going to save my changes. And let's pretend that I'm going to start a brand new file from scratch. So we have a few different ways of how we can start a new file. I can go to my file menu and I can choose the option of new. If I'm a keyboard person, I can do Control N. Or if I like my toolbar, there is right there, first thing on the toolbar, a new file icon. All in any of those options are going to take me to the same exact spot. They're going to take me here to this new file dialog box. Every time we create a file, there's always a template that gets applied. You can see which template is being applied here towards the bottom of the box. So if I kind of scroll over a little bit, currently it's going to apply my default CDF template. In my default template, I will want to have the most common things that either never change or rarely change. I want to have those items saved in my template. How do I edit that template? So let's cancel out. How do I find that template to make these sort of changes? We're going to open up our template and we're going to treat it basically like we do a proform file. So I'm going to go back up to my toolbar and click on my open icon. And that's going to browse me out to where my proform data files are stored. A proform data file is the files we create for each of our individual real estate transactions. For a lot of us, depending on our individual setups in our, individual networks and servers, most likely your data files are stored in a folder called data. If I'm not looking for a data file, I'm not looking for a closing file, I'm looking for a template, I just need to go to a different folder. So I'm going to use this up arrow here in my browser window. It's going to take me kind of one step backwards where I can see all of my available folders. Most of us should have within our SoftPro network, our SoftPro server, we should have a folder called templates. I can double click and open that templates folder. And that's how I can access those templates and then make any necessary changes. Now, if you open up your templates folder and it looks pretty much blank like mine does, why don't I see any of my templates there? The other thing to pay attention to, the other thing to take note of, is this file type dropdown. So currently what the system is browsing for are proform data files. Proform data files have an extension of .pfd, which stands for proform data. If that's not what I'm looking for, I can use that drop-down list to switch to show me templates. Templates have a different extension. They have an extension which is the letters after that period, after that dot. They have the extension of .pft for proform template. So now I can see, here's my default CDF template. If I double click to open that up, I can now go to any screen, anywhere, and edit those fees. So let's say, for example, I go to my CDF tab, and I'm going to go back to that additional title charges screen. Let's say our doc prep fee is no longer $250. We've increased it. We're going to now charge $300. That's our new norm. So in the template, I can change that fee so that every single time I create a new CDF file with this default CDF template, it will bring in that new fee of $300 instead of $250. So I'm not spending time changing that on a per file basis. Whatever we want in our templates is up to us. the way that I always like to think about templates is in this 80-10 rule, or sorry, 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, if I charge $500 for my closing fee, then I'm going to have that $500 in my template, because then I only need to change that 500 2 times out of 10. Now I've got my settlement fee in this particular template as $750. Is that my norm? What's the 80-20 rule? Do we typically charge $750 or do we typically charge $500? Whatever is going to be the most common. You can do 80-20, you can do 70-30. That's up to, us individually, of like whatever's the most frequent, the most common thing is what we can put in our template, and that is just saving us time on every single file, every single closing. So we can easily find those templates just by browsing out. So if we go back, I'm going to click on my open icon again. I just need to make sure I'm in the right spot. I need to know where my templates are stored on my network, on my server. If you happen to be in the wrong folder, well, we can use our back arrow. We can, move ourselves back and out, and, we can explore our computer, find that templates folder, and then just make sure that that file type dropdown is not set to show me only those data files. It's set to show me templates. And I can double click and open up any template and then make whatever edits that I want. If you edit your template, it's not going to work retroactively. It's not going to go back to any previous files ever created with that template and change any fees or contacts or anything. It's only going to apply to those files going forward that we use that template to create that new file with. So another convenient item other than our templates, setting up what fees that we typically charge, or maybe it's fees that typically our lenders charge. We can put all of those descriptions and or dollar amounts within those templates. What's another convenient item that we can kind of set up in the system to help us make that process of building the CD that much quicker? So that other convenient item is going to be a lookup table. So hopefully we're all aware of lookup tables. If, let's say, for example, I go to my lender contact screen. So this lender screen is where I put in the name and the address, all of the contact information I have about that lender, that loan officer, or maybe the processor. And we all know that we have that lender lookup code field. Hopefully, I shouldn't say we all know, hopefully we all know that anytime you see a field labeled lookup code, what does that mean? That means there's a table that lives behind that field that you can store and save information into. You can think of it kind of like a Rolodex. So when you put your cursor, you click your mouse and put your cursor into any field labeled lookup code, you can use your F9 function key, and then it will open your table for you. And so this is where you can store names and addresses and phone numbers and emails, so that I don't have to continuously type, that same information over and over. If I am, let's say, on my CD, and let's go to CD page 2, and there are certain payees that I frequently cut checks to, send wires to. I frequently see them on, many different transactions, and I want to have a place where I can store that name and that address. Maybe I have window envelopes where every time I send a check to that particular payee, I want to put that check in a window envelope and have that address display. But I don't want to have to continuously type not just the payee name, but also the address. We are able to create lookup tables from anywhere, including the CD. So I've got Sam's surveying here. So in section B, I've got a couple disbursements that need to go to Sam's surveying. And that's a surveyor that I see pop up on many different transactions. Can I store Sam surveying, their name and their address? So to create a lookup table, I'm going to click on my line number hyperlink. So specifically when you want to create a table on your CD, we do need to do it behind the CD line. If I click into, let's say, the payee name field, there's nothing here that indicates that there could or is a lookup table. However, if I hit the F9 function key, it will give me the option to create a lookup table. So if I click yes, it will allow me to build a lookup table and pull information from any field on this CD. So let me back up. So I'm going to hit cancel. How do I know how to build that lookup table? So one thing to know about Proform is that every single field, every single place that we type information into has an assigned field code. And that field code is how the system identifies where we want information to pull. So it's essentially how our documents work if we think about Ready Docs. But then it's also how our lookup tables work. So when you click into any field, you can always look at your status bar. The status bar is at the bottom of your screen. Over on the left-hand side, you're going to see always a running total of cash from buyer, proceeds to seller, and then what your file balance is. And that's always super helpful when, building our CD, balancing our file. If I look over to the right of my status bar, we will always see a reference to the field code wherever our cursor happens to be sitting. Wherever we have clicked our mouse, we will then see a code referencing that location in the system. We're going to use that code if we want to build a lookup table. So unfortunately, we cannot copy that code, but we can have a little piece of scratch paper next to us and we can jot down that code. So if I want to create a table that includes, let's say, payee name, I'm going to jot down that code of charge to name. I'm going to ignore the 25 for the moment. If I also want to include the address, I'm going to click in that field and I can jot down that code, charge ADR1. I can then go to the city, state, zip code or field and jot down that code. So that's how I'm going to build that lookup table structure. When I want to build that lookup table, I want to click into the what we call key field. What is the place? What is the field where I want to be able to hit F9 and that lookup table appear? So I'm going to do that from my payee name field. I'm going to click my cursor there and I'm going to hit F9. When I get this message that a lookup table does not currently exist, do you wish to create one? I'm going to say yes. you will see that it already puts in the code for the key field. So the key field in this instance is the payee, aka charge to name. You'll also notice that the number has disappeared. It doesn't include the number in that code. If I want this lookup table to be available on any line, in any section of my CD, I want to admit that 025. This just happens to be line number 25 of the CD, but I don't care about that. I want to be able to pull this surveyor name and address from any line in any section. So I'm going to admit that number. I'm then going to add an equal sign because I now need to name that column in my table. What is that going to be described as when I look at that lookup table? So I'm just going to call this payee. I can come down to the next line, hit enter. What's the next column going to be? So I'm going to put in that code of charge to ADR 1. That is my proform field code. I want it to pull the street address from the file. I'm going to say equals, and then let's call this column street address. Next, I'm going to do charge ADR2 equals, and that's, let's say, city, state, zip. So one thing to note when you are building the structure of a lookup table, you've got your field code, you have your equal sign, and then you have the header of the columns that you want in that table. We cannot use spaces. We can use uppercase, we can use lowercase letters. That's up to each of us individually, but we cannot put any spaces. If there are words you would like to separate, you can separate those with an underscore. So you can see what I did here with city, state, and zip. I just separated those words with an underscore symbol instead of a space. Once I click OK, it will let me know if I've made any mistakes. Maybe I typed a code wrong. Maybe I accidentally put a space where I wasn't supposed to. We can't have any spaces between, that equal sign in the code. I can't spell the code wrong, so you'll always get a warning. All right, so let's do here. Let's see, where do we do our space at? I'm going to do city. Let's just try state just to save time. Oh, here it is. We missed our 2. I thought I had put a space in there and I didn't. Okay. So you guys can see how you've got to pay attention to what you're typing. All right, so we've got charge to name, charge to address 1 and 2. All right, so now what am I missing? Okay, it's not liking me today. All right, let's hit cancel. Let me check my field codes. All right, that's our problem. All right, so let's do charge to name equals payee. And let's do ADR1, street, charge, ADR2. City, state, zip. All right, we were putting that word to in there. All right. So now it's created that lookup table for me. This lookup table is now ready to start accepting any new entries. So if I hit close, let's put in Sam surveying. Let's put in an address. If I now want to save that address, I can go back to my to field, hit my F9 function key, and anytime I want to add a new entry to my lookup table, I'm going to click insert entry. That contact is now available anywhere on my CD. So in this file, I've got the surveying fees here in section B. Let's scroll down to section H. Let's add a new row. Let's say that they're on this file, right? Pretending it's a different one. Let's say there's a surveying fee. We're going to charge the buyer. Who is that being paid to? If I click on that line number hyperlink, click my cursor into the to field and hit F9, I now have access to Sam surveying. I can simply just double click, pull in that name and address without having to retype it. So we can follow this process not only on page 2 of the CD. If we go back to that additional title charges screen, maybe there are lookup tables I would like to create here. Maybe my fees do often change. The descriptions change, the dollar amounts change. If you would like to create lookup tables in the additional title charges screen, you can do that as well. So you can follow that exact same process of choosing your key field, hitting that F9 function key, creating the table, and then making sure you've got those field codes. If we go back to page 2, another really important thing to understand about our CD is going to be those DS codes. So when we look at that DS column, those are our disbursement status codes. The disbursement status codes are what controls our money. So the way that our disbursements are created, what gets grouped together versus what is its own individual disbursement, not grouped with anything else. When we think about lender fees, we have the option, when we look at that DS dropdown, of D for deducted and L for lender. When we have a lender who is gross funding and we need to create a check or wire to that lender, we always want to use that L lender DS code. When we have a lender who is net funding, we want to use that letter D for deducted DS code. When we use that letter D, it will then automatically calculate, if we let it, our loan funding amount. So you can see that I've built my CD. I've got a handful of fees here, and then I've paid them all to that letter D disbursement status code. How does the file know that my lender is net funding? If I close my CD page 2 and go back to my general tab here in the file, we have a loan funding screen. When I double click and open that loan funding screen, this is exactly where I will find the designation of how that lender is funding the loan. Because I designated net funding and I have those particular loan fees on my CD, I'm showing them as payable to that letter D deducted DS code. That is allowing my file to calculate the loan funding amount. So even though my original loan amount is $700,000, my funding amount is down to $687,708. Letting that number stay in the black text allows it to automatically calculate. Because remember what we talked about earlier, the red text versus the black text. If there's something that you see in the file that's red text, that's something that a person manually typed, it can't automatically change or update. Anything we leave in the black text will automatically change and update because it's based on something else within the file. So in this example, my loan funding amount is based on those loan fees that I've put onto page 2 of my CD, and specifically those DS codes that I've assigned. The items contributing to that loan funding amount are those with that letter D DS code. Anything that we see that has the letter S. So with my SAM surveying, when I look at that drop down, S stands for separate check. Separate check means it's going to be its own standalone disbursement. It can be a check, it can be a wire, but it's not going to be grouped with anything else. What if I need to group together these two disbursements to SAM's surveying? They want one check. They don't want two separates. This is where, in our DS codes, our flex checks can be very, very helpful. A flex check can be used as a way to group disbursements together that don't have their own dedicated code. When we look at the DS code, the letters, we've got a code for our lender. We've got a code for the mortgage broker. We've got a dedicated code for the settlement agent, underwriter, title company. I don't have a dedicated code for my surveyor. I don't have one for my real estate agent, for example. So if you've got several disbursements, several fees that you need to group to the same payee, and it's not one of those payees that you can assign a code to as one of the contacts in the file, you can instead use your flex checks. So let's say I'm going to assign this to flex check number 1, and I'm going to also take this survey fee, assign it to flex check 1. Let's go down here to section H. We've got that other survey fee we added, and we're going to assign that one also to flex check number 1. What that will do for me is it will group those 3 different fees into one singular disbursement to that same payee. The way that I see my flex checks, if I close CD page 2, under our CD tab, we do have 2 flex check screens. We can create up to 25 different flex checks. So since I sent those to number 1, I'm going to go into the 1 versus 12, and there I see my disbursement. Those $3 amounts have all been lumped together as one disbursement to SAM Survey. So whether I'm going to export this file to ProTrust, if I'm using the Standard Edition, or if I'm using the Enterprise Edition, and I go to my disbursement register, instead of seeing, 3 separate checks, I'm only going to see 1. So if I look at my pending disbursements, I've got one grouped disbursement that can be either a check, a wire, a miscellaneous debit to that one singular payee. So I love using flex checks. It's such a convenient thing to when you're building, especially your file, building your CD of things that you kind of know ahead of time, um, things that need to be combined, things that maybe need to be separate. You can kind of set that all up while you're building your CD without having to worry about it in that disbursement time, in that disbursement process. You can get it ready to go. So one last thing I would like to point out, and this is something that is a little bit newer, I would say within the last 5, 6 years, the fact that we have this thing called attachments. So within Proform, if we look at our toolbar, one of the icons that we should all see is this. It looks like a kind of a scanner top of a copy machine, and when you hover your cursor over it, it's labeled as attachments. This is a place where I can store emails, documents, anything of importance to this file. The way that we can add items to our attachments is to either click on that attachments icon and then click our button that says attach. That will allow me to browse my computer. I can go anywhere. So let's say I want to go to my desktop and I want to grab this PDF HUD. If I double click on that, it will then allow me to give that a description. So let's say this is we'll say it's a prelim HUD. That is now an attachment to this Proform file. If my system is set to back up Proform, let's say every day at 8 o'clock at night, those attachments will get saved and backed up with that Proform file. If I ever need to open and look at this right from my attachments, I can highlight it and click View. Because it was a PDF, when I choose to view it, it will open up as a PDF. It'll open up in that format. Other than browsing our computer, we also have the ability to drag and drop attachments into the file. So if I split my screen, so let's say, for example, I want to grab something from my desktop. Maybe it's this owner's policy. If I just want to drag and drop that into my file, I can drag it with my mouse. As long as I land my cursor anywhere in that white space within the file, I can let go, and it will let me know that that's been successfully attached. We can drag and drop any kind of item. It could be PDF, it could be a Word document, it could be an Excel spreadsheet. We can even pull in emails. So any emails that are important. So I'm going to pull over my email here. So let's say, especially for those of us that work on multiple screens, multiple monitors, I've got my email up on one monitor and I've got Proform up on the other. And I got a very important email from Miss Leslie, and I want to pull that into the file. You can grab an email right from your email account, drag it into Proform. Once you let go of your left mouse button, it'll let you know that it was attached. Anytime I'm in Proform, if I go back to that attachments icon and I need to open up that email, I'm going to highlight, click View. That email now opens up in Outlook. I can hit reply. I can hit forward, right? I can jump in even if I wasn't in that conversation to start with. I can jump in that conversation now because it's an attachment to my Proform file. The other really cool thing is that we can also email out of attachments. So let's say, for example, this preliminary HUD, I need to send that over to the seller, the buyer, the agent. One of the other cool options we have from attachments is you can take anything that you've stored and then send it out in an email. So when I click this email button, it will give me a list of all of my current contacts within the file, and each of them will have a checkbox. I can choose whomever I want to send this to. Maybe I'm sending it to the lender, copying the buyer, copying the agent. When I click OK, it will create that Outlook email message for me with that HUD attached. If I go back, let's say I want to send that HUD out, but everyone in this list is no one I want to actually send the email out to. You can pick as many people as you want, and that includes 0 people, 0 contacts. So even if I don't choose anyone, if I don't click on any of those checkboxes, as soon as I click OK, the same thing's going to happen. It's going to create that Outlook email message. And now I'm able to, from Outlook, go ahead and address that to anyone I want. Maybe it's someone that's in my Outlook address book. Maybe it's one of my fellow coworkers, right? Maybe I wanted to send this to, let's say, Leslie. So I can add my subject, I can add my message, I can edit this email and then send it off. So attachments is a really great way to store very important, whether it be invoices, documents, very important information to your closing to your file, all within Proform, and then have those kind of live together in existence on your system. All right, so I know we're approaching the end of our hour here. Do you have any more questions that have come through, Leslie?
Yes, but you answered them.
Oh,
The
I did?
last one we
Okay.
got through was on how to attach an email, and you just went through that. So
Okay, awesome. So I wanted to try and focus on like kind of fees today because I know, as Leslie said, we're doing these tips and tricks. We're trying to do them a couple times a year. And so for those of you that frequent us, like thank you, thank you, thank you so much. We love to see you guys here. And then we also want to change it up. So I know we didn't touch on every single tip and trip today, but I feel like if we kind of put our heads together in terms of fees, like hopefully this was very helpful. And maybe gave you guys some ideas as to how you can kind of revamp maybe your templates, maybe the way you do your CDs, putting your fees in certain places, just kind of make your lives a little bit quicker, easier, because we all want convenience.
great. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for your time. And as Jessica said, we will continue to do these, and they will be version specific. So just keep an eye out on your email for standard or select, whichever you are looking for. And then remember, we will send out a follow-up email, and it'll have a link to this recording. If you want to rewatch it or share it out with anyone in your office, please feel free to do so. So thank you again to Jessica. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to hopefully having you on our next episode of Save You a Seat. Enjoy your week.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good day.